we will learn the definition of photosynthesis, what are the sites of photosynthesis in a plant, what is the outline of reaction of photosynthesis and the phases of photosynthesis, and then some adaptations in plants like C4 plants and CAM plants. You might not have heard about these before, but we'll learn about some adaptations in plants which help them deal with the process of photosynthesis and some factors that affect the rate of photosynthesis. So, living organisms like animals and human beings take food and oxygen from outside and produce carbon dioxide and energy, which help them perform their daily life functions. But where do animals get this food and oxygen from? They get it from plants. Plants produce food and oxygen for animals. And how do plants produce food? The process is called photosynthesis. Photo means light and synthesis means production, which is producing food in the presence of light. So plants take the energy of light and carbon dioxide and water from outside and produce food and oxygen. This process is called photosynthesis. There are two main categories of living organisms around us: autotrophs and heterotrophs. Autotrophs are the organisms that can produce their own food. For example, plants, algae, bacteria, and some phytoplanktons. You must have noticed that they all are green in color. And there are heterotrophs, which are the organisms that do not produce their own food and they have to take food from outside. For example, animals, fungi, protozoans, and some bacteria. So photosynthesis is the chemical reaction in which the autotrophs can convert the light energy, which comes from sun, to chemical energy, which is in the form of glucose. And this chemical energy in the form of glucose act as a source of food for other organisms. Then those organisms break down that food and produce ATP, the energy, for themselves to perform different functions. What organisms perform photosynthesis? Plants, bacteria, and algae, just like we saw in the previous slide. And we also noticed that most of them were green in color. That is because photosynthesis primarily occurs in organelles called chloroplast, which contain the green pigment called chlorophyll. Photosynthesis provides the foundation of energy flow in almost all ecosystems. So the summary of photosynthesis reaction is: when plants take carbon dioxide and water and utilize sun's energy to produce food in the form of glucose and oxygen as a byproduct. So there's a very interesting relationship or dynamics between the process of respiration and photosynthesis. Let's have a look at it. So plants use carbon dioxide and water. In their chloroplast, they perform photosynthesis. What do they produce? They produce glucose and oxygen. This glucose and oxygen is used by mitochondria of plants, animals, and other microbes to perform cellular respiration, in which energy is produced in the form of ATP. Again, the byproducts of respiration are carbon dioxide and water, which are then utilized by plants. So this circle keeps on going. If you look at the reaction, we have carbon dioxide and water getting converted into glucose and oxygen, and again glucose and oxygen will be utilized to produce carbon dioxide and water in the process of respiration. And look at the energy dynamics. Solar energy or sun's energy is converted into the chemical energy of food. This chemical energy of food is then broken down to form ATP, or the chemical energy, which is utilized by animals, and plants to perform other life functions. The main site of photosynthesis in plants are the leaves. Let's look at the structure of leaves. So here you can see that most of the cells in the leaves appear green. If you zoom in on the plant cell, you will see that with other organelles like nucleus and central vacuole, you have a lot of these green organelles called chloroplast. Zooming on the structure of chloroplast, you see that chloroplast is a double membrane organelle with outer membrane and inner membrane. And there are some stacks or folds of membrane called thylakoid. Thylakoid is the main site where you have chlorophyll pigment in the membrane, and membrane is where the first phase of photosynthesis reaction happens. So, chloroplast is the organelle in the plant cell which is the main site of photosynthesis. In plants, most of the chloroplast is in the leaves, that's why the leaves appear green. Thylakoids are nothing but the fold of membrane, these round folds that you can see, which contain the pigment chlorophyll required for the process of photosynthesis. The whole stack of thylakoid is called granum. These membrane folds are suspended in the fluid or the matrix called stroma. And overall, chloroplast is a double membrane organelle. This is the outer membrane and this is the inner membrane. Chloroplasts contain chlorophyll, which is the green pigment that captures light energy and utilizes that in the process of photosynthesis. Where is this chlorophyll present? It is present in the membrane of thylakoids. There are mainly two kinds of chlorophyll, chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. What is the main difference? The main difference is this R group. In chlorophyll, you will have this R group, and chlorophyll B, you will have this R group. The rest of the structure is same in both the types of chlorophyll. There is also an ion, the magnesium ion, in the middle of chlorophyll, and you know that these ions are responsible for giving color. For example, iron in the hemoglobin gives red color to our blood. Now plants appear green because they reflect green color. They absorb all the other colors from light and they reflect green color. That's the phenomena with everything you see around yourself. We see the color from the objects because that is the color that they reflect. So light is made up of small particles called photons, which move in the form of waves. These photons carry certain amount of energy in them, and that energy is utilized in the process of photosynthesis. So when a photon moves in the form of wave, these waves have different wavelengths. Depending on the wavelength, these photons produce different colors of light. What we can see is the visible spectrum of light, which is 7 different colors: violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, and red. But there are several other wavelengths which are not perceived by our vision. So 400 to 700 nanometer is the visible range of these wavelengths, and pigments absorb certain wavelengths to convert the energy into the chemical energy. Now let's look at what wavelengths are absorbed and what wavelengths are reflected by chlorophyll. Now if this is the spectrum of light, you know on this side you have blue colors, in the middle you have yellow and green colors, and on this side you have mainly red color. So this diagram is showing you that chlorophyll can absorb blue range of colors and red range of colors, and it reflects green range of colors, which is why they appear green. But food contains different pigments as well. For example, you have seen there are some orangish yellow color fruits or vegetables. They contain the pigment called carotenoids. Carotenoids are absorbing in the blue range and they reflect in the yellowish red range. That is why they appear yellowish red or orangish in color. Then there is a pigment called anthocyanin. Anthocyanin absorbs in the green and yellow range and they reflect in red range or purple and blue range. That's why they appear this in color. Now let's talk about another very important structure in leaves of plants. These are called stomatas. Stomatas are small pores or opening on the surface of leaf through which the gases come in the plant or leave the plant or the surface of the leaf. So stomata allows carbon dioxide to enter and oxygen to exit the leaves. Stomata are controlled by these kidney-shaped cells called the guard cells, which become bigger or smaller to make the opening of stomata wider or smaller. Stomata keeps a balance not only in the gas exchange during photosynthesis, but also the loss of water during the process called transpiration. Let's look at the overview of photosynthesis. So in a plant cell, photosynthesis occurs in the chloroplast. In chloroplast, photosynthesis occurs in two main phases. One is a light-dependent phase in which light energy is required, and the other is light-independent phase, also sometimes called the dark reaction, in which the light is not required. So in the light-dependent phase, the chlorophyll in the thylakoids of chloroplasts use light energy and water and produces oxygen as a byproduct. In this reaction, these cells also produce NADPH and ATP. These two are utilized in the dark reaction or the light independent reaction, in which carbon dioxide is fixed in the form of glucose or sugar, and this cycle is called, or this reaction is called, the Calvin cycle. Now let's delve into the details of light dependent and light independent reactions of photosynthesis. So light reaction occurs in the thylakoids of chloroplast. What are the things used as an input? So this reaction uses light energy, water, NADP and ATP. And what does it produce? It produces oxygen, ATP and NADPH. So ADP is changed into ATP and NADP is changed into NADPH. So overall, in this process, the light energy is converted into chemical energy in the form of ATP and NADPH, and these two products are then utilized in the dark reaction or the Calvin cycle. So let's look at the steps of light reaction or the light dependent reaction. First of all, a photon of light is absorbed by chlorophyll. The chlorophyll molecules are excited and it leads to photolysis, which is the breakdown of water molecule into oxygen and a proton, which is nothing but a hydrogen ion. In this process, an electron is also generated, and as this electron is moved through this membrane, just like you saw in electron transport chain during the process of cellular respiration, the movement of these electrons, just like in the wires you have electrical current, these produce energy and leads to the formation of H positive ion, and a gradient of H positive ion is built on one side of this membrane. This gradient of hydrogen ion then moves the ADP synthase and the movement of these ATP synthase molecules leads to the production of ATP. Here you have also seen that hydrogen ion is utilized for converting NADP into NADPH. So the end product of NADPH and ATP are produced in the light reaction, which will then be used in the dark reaction or the Calvin cycle. Now the dark reaction or the light independent reaction of photosynthesis occurs in the stroma of chloroplast. Stroma is this location. In this process, carbon dioxide is used and the ATP and NADPH, which was produced in the light reaction, are utilized. The end product of this reaction is glucose, which is the most important product of photosynthesis used by the animals in the process of respiration. So what is the overall summary of this reaction? In this reaction, the atmospheric carbon dioxide is fixed in the form of glucose. This step does not require the light energy, although it is dependent on light energy because it utilizes the products of light energy, which are NADPH and ATP. These two products are used to power the synthesis of carbohydrates. Thus, the dark phase of photosynthesis is actually the phase that produces sugar. So there are three main steps of Calvin cycle. The first step is fixing carbon dioxide. In this reaction, the 5-carbon compound ribulose biphosphate combines with carbon dioxide and forms a 6-carbon compound, which is immediately broken into 2 3-carbon compounds, which are 3-phosphoglycerate. The ATP and NADPH from light reaction convert 3-phosphoglycerate to glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, which is a 3-carbon sugar. So from the sets of 3 carbon dioxide, we get 6 molecules of glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. One of these molecules exits the Calvin cycle to lead to the formation of glucose. The remaining glyceraldehyde 3-phosphates from this step lead to the formation of the ribulose biphosphate or bisphosphate by the utilization of ATP, and this process is called the regeneration of ribulose bisphosphate or ribulose biphosphate. Now we'll look at the adaptation in plants in the form of C4 plants. C3 plants are those that perform Calvin cycle, and C4 plants have an additional step before they start the Calvin cycle. This adaptation is related to whether the plants are present in a cool and moist environment or they are present in a hot or dry climate. What happens during this adaptation is the plants that are C3 plants can keep their stomata open all during the day, but those that are growing in hot and dry climate, they open their stomata only partially because they want to reduce the loss of water. C3 plants are the plants growing in temperate areas like rice, wheat, or soybean. And the example of C4 plants is maize, sugarcane, sorghum. In C3 plants, photorespiration occurs almost simultaneously with photorespiration, and we know that in the process of respiration, the water is lost. Whereas with C4 plants, the photorespiration is minimized because the plants want to reduce the loss of water. Calvin cycle occurs in the mesophyll cells of leaves, but there is additional step before Calvin cycle in C4 plants that occurs in mesophyll cells. This leads to the carbon dioxide getting fixed in the form of oxaloacetate. Then the next step of Calvin cycle actually occurs in the bundle sheath cells in the C4 plants instead of the mesophyll cells in C3 plants. Another kind of adaptation is the CAM plants or the crassulacean acid metabolism. This adaptation is also related to the arid environment. So in these plants, half of the mechanism happens during night and half happens during day. So what these plants do is at night they open their stomata and they take up carbon dioxide, which is stored in the form of malic acid in the vacuoles. During the day, the stomata only opens for a short amount of time to conserve water, and carbon dioxide is released from the stored acid and then used in the process of Calvin cycle. This separation of time helps the plant to conserve water because they can keep their stomata closed for most of the time. Some example of CAM plants is cacti, succulents, and pineapple. So here you can see that during the day, the light dependent reaction is performed in the thylakoids and the remaining process is performed later on, in which the Calvin cycle utilizes the malic acid to release carbon dioxide for the production of the sugar molecules. Now let's have a brief look at the factors that affect the rate of photosynthesis. The rate of photosynthesis increases with the intensity of light up to a certain point, but beyond that, increasing the intensity of light will not keep on increasing the rate of photosynthesis. More carbon dioxide, more will be the rate of photosynthesis, but only up till a point unless the enzymes are saturated with carbon dioxide. Photosynthesis also occurs at an optimal temperature between the range of 15 to 35 degrees Celsius. A low temperature would decrease the enzymatic activity, and a high temperature can lead to the denaturation of enzymes. Lack of water can lead to closing of stomata, and closing of stomata reduces the carbon dioxide intake. Certain wavelengths of light, especially in the blue and red range, are the optimal wavelengths which are absorbed by chlorophyll molecules and perform the photosynthesis reaction. If there is high level of oxygen, it will compete with carbon dioxide to bind with the enzyme, therefore leading to the process of photorespiration instead of photosynthesis. Now to summarize, we have seen three kinds of plants. C3 plants are those that perform normal photosynthesis. They take up carbon dioxide, and this carbon dioxide is utilized in Calvin cycle to produce glucose. But C4 plant want to reduce the loss of water, that is why they keep carbon dioxide in the mesophyll cells, and then after closing their stomata, they take carbon dioxide molecules to the bundle sheath cells, and there you have the production of glucose. CAM plants want to keep their stomata closed during the day, that is why during the night they take up carbon dioxide and fix them in the form of malic acid, which is then used in the Calvin cycle, and remaining of the light reaction occurs during the day in CAM or the CAM plants.